our clinical colleagues. And that, hopefully, will take us to precision medicine. If we can get it. Okay, so now, let's go through what I think of as precision medicine. And so to do that, I'm going to start out with a detour. I'm going to start out with a detour into Middle Earth. So for those of you who recognize, this is Tolkien's Middle Earth, and it's a map, and I think the map is a really key thing to have. The map gives you directions. It tells you where to go to take that ring, to throw it in the lava and get rid of the ring, right? And where you're going to go so that you can, whoops, so you can pass through areas so you don't have to go over mountains and go across lands and get wherever you need. But it doesn't tell you where orcs are. It doesn't tell you where bad weather is. And it doesn't tell you the way that's going to be the most efficient way to get there. Okay? It just tells you. So maps were extraordinarily valuable. Does anybody recognize this? The old triptychs, right, from AAA? So, you know, maps also, you can get directions from them, and someone can lay out on a series of maps and tell you where to turn and everything to do. But, you know, as you're trying to drive, and, you know, we're not even supposed to text, right? When we're driving, we're supposed to look at a map and figure out where we're going. It doesn't work so well. So along came Google Maps. And Google Maps is way more than a map. And I think this serves as an incredibly valuable framework to think about how we should approach healthcare. Because this is a map, just like the map of Middle Earth, with all the streets in Boston. And in fact, all that is a layer of data. It's a single layer of data. And what's valuable about it is that we can lay on top of that traffic patterns, so we know where to go and what streets to avoid. But this is not a single layer of data. This is not a separate piece of data. It's two interacting pieces of data. You have the map, and you have another layer that is the traffic patterns. And in fact, you can take that and you can create, just like the triptychs, an entire set of directions. And through a simple Google search, which is basically an algorithm that we all write by typing into our search bar, saying we want to go from Boston down to Florida, and we need to stop at these points and want to look out at these certain vistas, and it'll lay the whole thing out. But each of those is just a layer of data interacting with each other, layered on each other. You can actually set it up so you can look at each place you have to make a turn, so you recognize that space and you don't miss your turn. That's layering Google Earth onto the Google Maps. And so in essence, this is what you're doing right here. Right? We're taking each layer, and an algorithm is written. That's the search bar. And you tell it what you want and what you want to have, and it can take all kinds of different information and put those together through a search and use those. And it's not going to use certain layers, but it's going to use other layers of data that are all interacting with each other. And to me, this is exactly what we need to do in healthcare. We need to start thinking about taking all the clinical signs and symptoms, the physical exam that your very astute clinician does, and capture all of that information. And then we need to take the genome. That's just one layer. You know, people talk about that being so much in precision medicine. To me, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's just what we see above the water. Everything else is just huge underneath that. We have the epigenome, the microbiome, all types of other data, EKGs, EEGs, pulmonary function tests, whatever you want, as long as you can get it into a format that we can then build algorithms to vertically interrogate that data, that becomes hugely valuable. And I'm going to show you how in just a minute. Even exposures, what drugs you're taking, and the beauty of all this is that you don't have to have every data point in every layer, because there's mathematical models statistical modeling that will allow you to interrogate through even without all those layers in each one. I mean, each data points in each one of those different layers. So how do we do this? Well, let's take us through what we do today. So this to me is where we are in our current state. You basically, and I've simplified this, there's the clinical information. This is what your clinicians collect. There's laboratory data, omic data, this could be radiology data, it could be all kinds of different data. And then there's external databases. There's the literature. There's all kinds of information on genomics and all kinds of different information on the microbiome. And this is all different information. Well, right now, currently, a care provider examines a patient, orders a laboratory test or a radiology test, and then has to make decisions to then decide how to care for that patient. All right? Again, remember, they can use 5 pieces of data. When Partners changed over from its patchwork of different systems to Epic, we had to convert over all our data. We did everything beyond, before 5 years was put into an archive. Everything from 5 years, the most recent 5 years, was put in real time. We had to convert over, that's 14 million radiology exams, 500 million pathology reports. Okay, one report could be an entire genome. Think about that, 3 billion base pairs. So this is the amount of data that a clinician has to look at to make a decision on their patient. And we do some simple algorithms. We do some things now that are very helpful. So a simple algorithm, someone comes in with renal failure, let's say, or heart failure. They want to know what that person's kidney function is. So they order, the physician checks off on their little box, I want a glomerular filtration rate. Tells you how good the glomeruli are filtering the blood, removing toxins, right? Well, that's not something you put in an analyzer and get out. What you do is you measure the BUN, the creatinine, you get a 24-hour urine, how much volume, and you can, that's an algorithm that measures that and gives more information than any one of those individual parameters does to the clinician to help them understand what to do. And some of the algorithms become a little more complicated, and that would be an example of what I showed you before with what we do when we capture, using next generation sequencing, 300 or 400 genes that we're going to deep sequence, so maybe 100x depth of sequencing for each one of those genes, giving you millions and millions of base pairs that you have to go through. And we have algorithms that look at each one of those, line up all those genes, line up all those sequences, look at them, and then compare them to the literature and to everything we know in our own databases to see is there a mutation or not. And that's a pretty complex algorithm that we've developed to be able to do that. And that then we can provide to the caregiver. And we can say, here's a tier 1 mutation. Here's something that patient's cancer is likely to respond to this particular drug. Or a tier 2 mutation where we say, this is a mutation that is likely to be beneficial from being on this particular protocol with a combination of drugs. Or tier 3, 4, 5. We tier each of those different mutations and give those to the clinician. Well, what we really need to get to, and this is our future state, is where we can take all of this data in those various layers and start interrogating them through building of algorithms, through machine learning, through mathematical modeling, to be able to provide that information back to that clinical caregiver so that they can take care of the patient in the best way possible. So let me give you an example of one that we've done in our department where it is involving patients with iron deficiency anemia. So now imagine we take, because we have all this data now aggregated, 10,000 hematology results. That's all these things right here. here's a hematology panel. It's basically got 9 components to it: a red blood cell count, a hematocrit, hemoglobin, a mean corpuscular volume, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those tells you something about the red blood cells. And when patients are anemic, those go up or down depending on which parameter you're actually looking at. And iron deficiency anemia has a certain pattern to it. We took 10,000 of those and we gave it to 5 different hematologists, experts in this field. And we said, what can you tell us about these patients with iron deficiency anemia? What they can tell you is if the patient's anemic or not. They can also kind of tell you if it's iron deficiency. They can predict that it is. That's about all they can do. Now, we then trended all the data. There were 2,000 patients, so an average of 5 results on each patient. And we trended all of it. We said, now what can you tell us about it? You know, you've got all these trends of when the patient was anemic, when they're not. And that's all they can tell you. Nothing more. So we went into the literature. We took information on the patients. We took all those different things I was just showing you, databases, and this information, and patient information. And we built, using mathematical modeling, knowing that the life of a red blood cell is 120 days, that it's biconcave in shape, and how each one of those parameters will actually affect those. And what we came out with, and when I say we, this is John Himss, this is not me, but what he was able to identify with his team is a prediction model that with 95 or greater, 96 actually, percent specificity, greater than 88% sensitivity, identify who in the population of patients with iron deficiency anemia is going to be anemic in 60 days. So now, all of a sudden, what we can arm our clinical colleagues with is the information to say, here's the patients in that population you need to take care of. Here's the ones that you, and we're not telling them how to take care of them, although I think we will one day, but treat them with iron, treat them with a transfusion, treat them with EPO, however you treat them, so that they don't get anemic, so that they don't have to go into the hospital. Hospitals are bad places. People get sick in hospitals. You don't want to go to a hospital. Keep them out of the hospital. Keep them healthy. Keep them at work. But just as importantly was the vast majority of patients that we can now say, you know what? You don't need to be treated for the next 2 months. You don't need that iron that's going to cause you constipation and abdominal cramps and pains. So that we can identify the right patients that those clinicians can spend the time to make sure they're okay and don't need to for the other part of the population, so that in the future, you know, you can rerun the algorithm in a few weeks or a month or however often you want to do it, and you can say, okay, you're still good, or uh-oh, we're going in the wrong direction. So this is the power of what I think you can do, and it's not going to be one time. Every time that patient comes in, we're going to get more data. We're going to get more information. This becomes dynamic. And so all of a sudden, we're able to treat this patient, and each time they come in, we're going to know more and more about what they need, what the best drug is. They come in with a pneumonia, we know which antibiotic is best for them because of who they are, how they've responded before, and what their characteristics are. So I'm going to, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this quickly. This is how we're building it. Yeah. So basically, we've built these 4 pillars. There's a hardware-software component to it. Again, I'm not going to go through these in detail. This is probably what you all know more than I do. The bioinformatics, that's building the algorithms to do this testing. We then have a biostatistics component of this. This is my factcheck.com. This is the fact checkers, right? Because you can build an algorithm and get almost any answer you want. But we want to make sure it's biologically relevant, that it's relevant to our clinical patients. And then you have to get it into a patient, into the knowledge base, into the ability for clinicians to use this. And if anyone's interested, there's a couple publications I've got on it. The references are down here. But basically what I've told you, and we're getting to the end here, you know, you have to take internal databases. We have to take clinical information, pharmacy information, laboratory information, radiology, all of these different databases. We then have to be able to bring in databases from external sources, like genomics and the literature that we've talked about. And that all has to come in. And you know, Rob was talking earlier, do you put it in a cloud, do you put it in a server, do you put it in a network? I don't really care. I'm agnostic to that right now. I think eventually things are probably mostly going to be in a cloud, but you know, I don't care. We've got to get that data into our systems and structured. That's the key. It has to be structured in a way that we can interrogate it. And then once you have that data, you've got to convert it to information. Right? We've got to convert that into information. That information is like the lining up those sequences and figuring out which ones that are variants and which are not. And then we've got to take that information and create knowledge from that. What does that information tell us? How do we use that? And once we have that knowledge, we then have to make it actionable. We need to make sure it gets in the hands of those busy clinicians so they know how to use it. We need to make sure it gets in the hands of patients themselves who are hungry for this kind of information. We need to get it into the hands of healthcare systems that can use this for population management, for looking at entire populations, not just individual patients. And of course, the laboratories can use this in very effective ways as well. I'm not going to go through how we do this. We've done this for a couple other areas. I've given you some examples. So in the interest of time, I'll just end by saying we need to leverage our electronic health records and administrative systems to be able to take advantage and really be able to do what I've been talking about today. I think by doing this, we will provide higher quality, safer, more efficient patient care. Those are all keys, particularly quality. We will provide better quality care by getting earlier the right diagnosis and getting patients on the right treatment protocols sooner. I think this is going to be a new way of thinking about how we manage individuals and populations of patients. And finally, I think this will provide ways to better support the entire healthcare mission, anticipating disease, being able to do preventative disease in a much better and more sophisticated way than we're currently doing. So I'll end there. I like to compare this to the iPhone. When the iPhone first came out, I was an early adopter. I got one the first week they came out, the first version. People made fun of it. There was already the BlackBerries and all those other things out there. But probably if every one of you reached into your pocket or pocketbook, you pull out some kind of a smartphone device, it has changed how we all work and function. And I think this is something that can change how healthcare is delivered, and that's what we're looking to do. Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions.
So I was just going to ask, you talk a little bit about how you want to get data presented to you in a certain way to take certain actions. And you talk about in order to have that, the data has to be structured in a certain way so you can get that. So the nature, I'm guessing, in your field is that the types of information that you want will sometimes change, right? The nature of what you're looking for and how that data is, what you're looking for, what the data visualization is will keep changing. Have you had issues where, therefore, the structure has to change along with it? I guess that's my question, where sometimes you've said, okay, I want to change how I view the data, so because of that, you say, can you make this change in how you visualize the data? And the person says, well, yes, but we have to change the structure of it, and it's going to take a lot of time. And so I was kind of curious your thoughts about how, when you implement maybe a structure for data, how the flexibility of that structure in terms of how you visualize it and the changes in what you're looking for.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So I would say that we have thought about this a lot. We haven't had to address it yet because I think we're just too young and trying to develop it. I think that it absolutely will come a time when you will have to do that. The problem that we've had, or the way we've approached it so far, has been almost imposed on us because of the desire to be able to look at all of these data together, it restricts how we can format the data of each type in each of the different kinds that come in. And so that constraint has limited us a little bit, because we want to take, ASCII data, we do natural language processing and have to pull that in and try and structure that in a way that we can also look at the digital data from a radiology exam, and to be able to get those in a way that they can talk, interact with each other, or that we can build algorithms that easily interact, has constrained the way we can actually structure our databases. And so that's been more of the problem. I think we will get to a time, and we haven't really addressed what will happen, how it's going to be that we would do a data conversion. We have had to do some data conversions to new structures to be able to get it into what we want. So we have a SQL database that we want to move over into another type, and so we have to move that over and restructure it. And that we've had to do, but they've been relatively small projects so far. So I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know how we're ultimately going to be able to address it when those all change, but we haven't had to yet. We are constrained in how we do it to be able to get all these different types of data, to be able to kind of interact with each other, be able to interrogate them together.
What questions are, from a data exchange standpoint, is there a lot of exchange of this information in the data with other research institutions as well?
Yeah, so the question is there a lot of exchange with other institutions? And to date, we have not exchanged it with any other institutions. What we have done is so I got to Partners, I came up here from Philadelphia, from Penn, about almost 5 years ago. And at that time, pathology had, we have 5 major hospitals. All of them were on a different format. We all agreed on a single format with single dictionary. Everything is identical. And so we can now use data across all Partners, but we've not tried to go outside of Partners. And it's a problem, because even if you look at Epic, which is a system that's across the country, everybody builds it a little bit differently. And so we can build an algorithm that even sits inside of Epic or runs inside of Epic, and it won't be able to run in Kaiser or something like that. So that's definitely something that we're trying to think about. How do we put those on top of, almost like something that sits over the data that you might be able to do? But it's also going to be something that I wish there was, I really wish there was more standardization. The radiologists have done a really good job in that domain with DICOM that allows for very standardized data, and most of the rest of healthcare IT has not done that well.
So I'm thinking about, with laboratory tests, chemistry tests, or whatever, there's a range of what's normal, there's calibration of all of that. And in health information exchange today, there's operating rules and then there's standards and govern some of that. So when you get to those layers of the algorithms and the integration of those algorithms, what are your thoughts on there needing to be normal ranges or the equivalent of standardization or operating
Right.
rules to make sure that across health systems or whatever, they're looking at this the same way?
So it's basically through a LOINC. So we standardize through a LOINC. So it allows us to be able to say this equivalent is to that, and so that they can be spoken to or compared to each other. So that's how we've done it so far. But again, because we have the same dictionaries, we do have some slightly different instruments between the MGH and the Brigham, for example. And so we've had to do that a little bit, but because we're just working in our system, it's been relatively limited in terms of what we do. But any place we have it, we create a LOINC that basically accommodates for that.
But from the clinician's perspective and interpretation, is there?
So the clinician will only, yeah, okay, I understand your question. The clinician will not see a single piece of data they'll only see what's done in their hospital. The algorithms provide an interpretation of multiple data sets, but doesn't say, oh, this one had a sodium of 142, and the standard over at MGH only goes to 140 or something like that. So that it would look outside the normal range. They won't see that. They'll say, oh, this person's is at risk for their renal failure going up because that sodium's there, the potassium's here, the chloride's here, the BUN, the creatinine. We basically merge all those together and give a risk assessment, not those individual data points. The data points they can get, but those are for their own hospital with their own range within it.
So that risk assessment, do you see that being universal across national?
I'd like that.
In the future.
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. So there's already places that are doing that. If you look at, for example, Oncotype DX. Oncotype DX, and this is one of the areas that the FDA is really looking at closely with the LDTs. But the Oncotype DX is for those of you who don't know, it's a company out in California that provides breast cancer screening, breast cancer risk. And so you send them a couple slides, and they do a panel. It's a black box. This is one of the things we don't like. This is what the FDA doesn't like. They do this black box analysis. We think it's somewhere between 20 and 22 markers that they use, including a proliferation marker. And then they tell you it's high or low risk. If it's high risk, you have to go have adjuvant chemotherapy, and if it's low risk, you don't. And a lot of people are using it, but we don't know what it really means, and it's not perfect. We think we can do much better. So, yeah, people are already accepting these kind of national risk stratifications.
Last question, please.
Can I just point out, LINC is actually an organization, it's an acronym. I'm sensitive to acronyms being in IT, and it stands for Logical Observation Identifiers, Names, and Codes, in case people wanted to look that up and research it. Sorry to interject.
So my question is actually related to the previous two questions. So being a partner, you have the luxury of numbers, those millions and millions of tumors and all these things, so that you build up the ability to deliver this kind of therapy. But if you could kind of look into the future, and you have a patient that presents with something in Winnetonka, Wisconsin, how do you envision partners as an organization delivering therapy to that patient?
Yeah.
Will it be, is that going to come? Will it be monetized? Do you feel like, if you could put a number on it, is it 5 years, is it 10 years? What are you thinking?
So, first of all, I want that patient to be able to be advantaged by the same things we do. And my goal, and I know I'm not supposed to do this because I'm not very entrepreneurial, we write these algorithms and I want to give it to anybody. I'll hand them out. I'm interested in developing them, we'll give them away. I don't care. Partners will probably say they want something from, companies will probably start from this and things like that. So the difficulty is going to be what we were discussing before, is that Minnetonka healthcare system may not have the same dictionary, so that when they try and implement that algorithm, someone's going to have to go in and say, oh, a CBC is equivalent to the heme account, because those two are actually the same thing, but they're called different things. Or their reference ranges are different, and they're going to have to be corrected for these different things. And then it's going to have to be revalidated there. So until we can get some better standardization, like I think radiology has done with DICOM, I think we're going to have problems making these universally available. But once they are, or if you can figure out how to do that, or if they send to us and we can do it, like the sequencing of the tumors or something like that, then there's a couple really nice things that are out there. For example, we might say that it's this is a drug that's now FDA approved, and they can get it in Minnetonka, even though it's not one that anyone's ever used there. They could probably just order it up and start using it. There's a really great website called clinicaltrials.gov. And you can go on clinicaltrials.gov, and you can basically find out any clinical trial that's happening in the United States. And then you can see if you've got a patient that has a certain mutation or a certain type of tumor with certain features to it, you can put that into clinicaltrials.gov and you can find out where clinical trials are going on, and you can call them or their physician can get in contact with them, and maybe it's here in Boston, maybe it's in San Francisco, maybe it's down in Houston, Texas. That would give you the opportunity to take advantage of what's happening, not just here in Boston, but anywhere across the country.
I just wanted to say thank you for speaking tonight. I'm just so glad that you moved here from Pennsylvania. I know I feel better. I'm sure everyone else feels better knowing you're doing the work you're doing to